But yeah, I mean, I just want to get, everyone's thoughts here on the Bayern draw and, kind of how they feel about it in terms of confidence, right? So, Sash, I'll go to you first. When we got drawn against Bayern, you know, where was your mind at?
So when we first got drawn against Bayern, I was very happy, to be honest, because I wanted a big team. Like, bro, what's the point being in the Europa League, playing Slavia Prague, beating them, and then celebrating? Like, it's like, okay, fine. Like, yeah, we have to win the games that we play. But Arsenal belong on this European stage where in the quarterfinals, semifinals, we're playing PSG, Real Madrid, Bayern. We're going toe to toe with them and beating them. At some point you have to face this test, and I wanted Arsenal to have a big test because in terms of quality, I think we can beat Bayern, I think we can beat Real Madrid, I think we can beat PSG, I think we can beat any team purely on the basis of quality. But then there is something, as Mourinho said, called football heritage. It's like the history of the team in that competition, and that's something Arsenal don't have. We've never won the Champions League, and in Wenger's last 7 to 8 seasons, we were embarrassingly getting knocked out of the round of 16 to anyone. It could be Bayern, it could be Barca, it could be Milan, it could be Monaco. We were dreadful, right?
Yeah.
And I want Arsenal to, redeem themselves and establish themselves as a team that will turn up in a European night. And I want us to have a special night against Bayern. And before, when we used to play Bayern, Barca's. I used to live in India back then, and I used to stay up till 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m. and watch us get spanked 5-1, and then go get up the next day, go to school. So it was horrible. It was just the worst time to be alive. And I want revenge. I smell blood because I see Bayern. I look at their midfield and I'm like, hey, wait a second. Our midfield is much better than their midfield, like genuinely. I think our defense is better than their defense, right? And yeah, I think the front three is amazing, but I think we have a pretty good front three as well. And I think if you just look at both the teams as a whole, I think it's pretty even. And I think we actually have a really good chance if you look at how we're playing and if you look at how Bayern are playing. So I want revenge. And I think this will be a great opportunity for us. And as Maxwell Lewis here says in the comments, he says last time in the UCL versus Bayern, both teams were completely different. Arsenal coming back for it. Exactly. Like the last time we played against Bayern, our team was so different. We didn't even have a defensive midfielder, like a proper defensive midfielder. Our defense had like Koscielny and Mustafi, guys like this. I like Koscielny; he was a great player for us. But I still think Gabriel Magalhaes and William Saliba, look at their physicality. They're like just, I think, on a different level. And I think we
I'm
have
pretty
a.
sure I'm pretty sure Xhaka was playing center back the last time we played Bayern.
So the last time we
Or
played Bayern was 2017. So Xhaka didn't play as a center back, but he was playing. Yeah, he was playing in midfield.
yeah,
So
yeah.
in the first leg, we did Xhaka, Coquelin, and Coquelin was really declining at that point.
Yeah.
Robin, I remember cutting in and scoring. The second leg, the first half performance was exceptional, but then the
was
second half, we got torn apart and
exactly
changed.
when Koscielny came off in both games when it went down. I think the aggregate score when Koscielny was on the pitch was like 2-0 Arsenal, and
Yeah,
then when he came off it was 10-0 Bayern.
Yeah.
But
yeah. But that won't happen today. If we have an injury, Ben White will move to centre back. Tomiyasu will come to right back. So I think this Arsenal team is very different. And if Bayern, they try to come at us like how they did back in the day, we're going to have guys like Martinelli in the transition. I think who's going to be really a big factor for us. So very much looking forward to it. I don't want to go into this tie thinking like, oh God, it's Bayern. I want us to go out there and enjoy it. And that's what I think we will do.
Yeah. Rohan, what do you think?
yeah, I think we obviously some people will be worried about what's happened previously against Bayern Munich, but it's a completely different team under a manager who is moving forward as opposed to Arsene at the time who was declining. And just I really wanted either Barcelona or Bayern Munich because I wanted to get revenge on one of those two teams. We need to get revenge on them. And it's a really good narrative as well. Arsenal playing against Bayern Munich, what's happened in the past. And you've got Arteta versus Tuchel as well. There's a good little storyline there where I think they faced each other 3 times and Arteta's won twice and Tuchel's won once. So there's so many good little stories that you can see. You've got Harry Kane coming back as well, and Gabriel versus Harry Kane. That's been a massive mismatch in our favour. Gabriel has been fantastic against Kane, regardless of the goals that he has managed to score against Arsenal as well. And I just look at both teams, and I think, taking into consideration the fact that Bayern Munich won't have any fans in the first leg, I think that's a massive, massive bonus for us. And I think we need to capitalise on that. Try and get this game won in the first leg. And I actually think it's better for us to play at home in the first leg, because I think we'll be able to play with more freedom and with more fluidity. Whereas I think if we're playing away from home first, granted, if it goes to extra time and it goes to penalties, you then have a disadvantage if you're playing away from home in the second leg. But I want us to play with that free-flowing way of being able to just go into that first leg and not really worry about being too pragmatic. Arteta's a very pragmatic coach, but he's also a very stubborn coach. He's pragmatic in the sense that he will always adapt to the opposition, but he's stubborn in the sense that it's his principles of play that we won't deviate away from. They're the non-negotiables. And I look at the way Bayern play. There are threats, as Sasha alludes to, in terms of the front line. I think Musiala is a massive danger in this game. That's why I'd want Declan Rice very much on him, particularly in the press, to prevent him from turning and driving forward. And Declan Rice and Musiala, they have came against each other on international duty before, when England played Germany, and it was a pretty good matchup between the two. Both had their moments. And I think if Bayern Munich play Tell alongside Kane, that's kind of, it's very similar to the Son Harry Kane dynamic that could work for them. So that's something to be wary of. But where we can
Sane as well,
and Sane as well. Yeah. And you've got Alphonso Davies as well, giving you that threat down the wide areas as well. But Bayern Munich, they have a lot of weaknesses. I don't think they deal with, they're not the smoothest in build-up, especially since they've started to favour a partnership of De Ligt and Eric Dyer. And Goretzka, who's technically not the most secure footballer out there. He's very much that kind of box crasher. But he's been dropping into left centre-back in build-up a lot for Bayern Munich this season. And I'm looking at Arsenal and the way that we've approached teams this season in the press, where it's adapted depending on the opposition. I'm looking at Bayern Munich, and I think we need to go man-to-man against them and to really press them and to make it very difficult for them. And we've got the players across the back line to be able to deal with the front in transition with the likes of Gabriel and Saliba. It is obvious we just have to be wary of certain threats like that Kane and Tell dynamic if they do start him. But I just look at it and I think this is where we want to be. It's obviously a very scary fixture schedule coming up if we do keep progressing. But you'd rather be in it than not be in it, right? And we have a very good opportunity to showcase our skills and our talents in front of the world against another European giant. I look at this as such a exciting matchup. I didn't want the likes of Atletico or Inter because I felt that's going to be very much a stylistically similar to Porto. Whereas I think those types of team are actually probably our biggest weakness. But a game against a Bayern Munich, I think it actually plays into our strengths where we can really hurt them. And I think we have to respect them because their numbers in terms of the number of chances they've created, they're right up there in Europe still. But what we can do at home with 60,000 fans as well, we can definitely close this game off in the first leg if we're smart and we're efficient as well. Efficiency is going to be key. The big games is always about the boxes. Usually tactically there's not loads between the two teams, but it's how efficient you are in the box, and that's what could be really key in this game.
Yeah, no BCMs this against Bayern Munich.
I prefer not to speak.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with both of you guys. Where it's, I think people are putting too much emphasis on what happened 7 years ago. Like you guys said, there's one guy who's going to be, I mean, I guess two if you want to include Arteta, but there's one guy who's going to be involved in these matches who wasn't there. Or who was there previously, and that's Thomas Muller. Outside of that, it's a completely different setup for both teams. Like you said, we're very familiar with Kane. There's a pretty good chance that Tuchel decides to overthink things and start Eric Dyer at center back against us, which would be a lot of fun. Muller is a really excellent player going forward, but I think he's kind of past his prime at this point. Definitely not someone who is going to be a problem for us defensively. And then just on top of that, I think Bayern are picking up a few injuries, right? There's I forget the name of the right back that they signed in January, the one that we were kind of interested in, but he picked up an injury.
Sasha Bowie.
Yeah, Sasha Bowie. So Sasha Bowie got an injury. I think Manuel Neuer also left the Germany camp with some sort of muscle problem as well. So those are two things that could really factor into how we play, especially if Neuer's out. I think that's a big thing. Um, and yeah, I just think there's a bunch of matchups that we can exploit all over the pitch, right? I like that Martinelli against Kimmich matchup. Like you said, I think Sash, like you said, like I think our midfield stacks up very well against them. So, while I'm loath to sit here and say we're going to run away with it, we're going to blow them out of the water, I think we absolutely have the capability to beat these guys and advance into the semifinals. And then we'll talk about what happens there. But yeah, I think it's all there for us. And like you guys said, we just have to capitalize in that first leg and really beat them by a score line that's demoralizing for them and comfortable enough for us. Where if we don't have our best day at Bayern, we can get away with it.
Yeah, I think there's two things for us that we really need to keep an eye out for. First thing is, I don't want us to get into a shell, when we play. I want us to play with freedom. I want us to play without fear. Playing without fear doesn't mean you're reckless and leave everything open. It's more how you are on the pitch, your body language, the way you use the ball, you're like positive, you want to really go for it, and I want to see that from Arsenal. And the second thing, and this is my only concern, and I saw it a little bit against Porto as well. I think Porto had one of the best tactical performances against Arsenal I've seen this season. They were incredible at the Emirates. Honestly, to restrict Arsenal to that little over 120 minutes, like I know Arsenal were maybe having like playing with a bit of like the handbrake off in the first like 45-60 minutes, but still Porto were exceptional. And even the way they were building up, like it was not like they were just playing through our press, but they would keep the ball, they would work it out wide, and they would play these clip balls out wide, and they were finding a lot of space, especially on QVR's side, I felt in the second half. And I'm just a bit worried that we should not give this sort of space to Sane, Tell, as Rohan mentioned, and any of Bayern's like wide players, basically, because they're really quick and they have Harry Kane who will be in the box. So that's the only thing. And also Muller may be making runs off Kane. So I don't know how they're going to set up, but I do think they have the threats to hurt us. So I want us to be like a bit wary. But I would also like to ask both of you a question. And Rohan, maybe you could go with this because you did like a piece on like Arsenal's out of possession work. I was just curious, if you were an opposition manager trying to set up a team against Arsenal, how would you set the team up and what do you think our weaknesses are?
I think that the game against Porto is a very good way of setting up against Arsenal. And last season as well, when Newcastle played us at the Emirates and when Everton beat us at Goodison Park as well, those types of teams, in terms of that mid-block, we have found it difficult to play through them in terms of being able to generate a lot of clear-cut opportunities. I mean, like you alluded to, Porto is set up really well in their mid-block. And it's not a case of where they're sitting deep. Teams who sit deep, there's a narrative that Arsenal can't break that low blocks. That was coming through at the start of the season. That's false. Arsenal play really well against low blocks. It's the teams who have really good physical intensity in the middle of the park, who can match us, who can help retain second balls, because that's what Porto did. I don't think over the past 2 years, when we've had our best 11, our core spine available, nobody has bettered Porto against us in terms of being able to win second balls. The amount of times they would go long, we'd win the first ball, but they would be there to win the second ball and then recycle it back to their goalkeeper and they'd restart. They did that time and time again. And I think, like I alluded to, teams who have a lot of physical intensity and security in the middle of the park, they will do really well against Arsenal. And that's why I was a little bit fearful of coming up against an Inter Milan or an Atletico Madrid right now, because I think you're going to get a very similar type of stylistic matchup. And in terms of in build-up, now, what was frustrating for me in the Porto game was that Porto set up in this kind of like 4-2-3-1/4-5-1 block, right? So we would actually do some really good things where we would provoke them to engage. We'll invite them onto us by staggering our two centre backs. So if Gabriel receives it, then Saliba will drop a little bit deeper. to provoke them to come onto us. And then the fullbacks were free, but Saliba, I didn't think had the best game in possession against Porto. Where I think he showed some nerves, and I think Gabriel did as well, where they weren't able to access the free man. And that's the weakness that we could have exploited in that game. But from Porto's perspective, what they did is that they were very aggressive when they jumped, but they were also they were able to get back into shape in their block quickly. And that's why I allude to teams who have a lot of physical intensity in the middle of the park, who are able to engage, but also able to squeeze in the middle of the pitch to block off lanes and to effectively force you to go out wide. But at the same time, I think whilst that's probably the best way teams could set up against Arsenal, I think there are things that we can do so much better. Like if you look back at the build-up to our goal against Porto, it's the Jorginho ball over the top to stretch their back line, to push them deeper. And then that creates a disconnect between their midfield and their defensive line, where you can then win the second ball. And then their structure is not as assured in that moment because of that ball that stretched them. You can then create something really quickly. And we didn't do that enough. We didn't play the ball over the top enough. We weren't direct enough. So I think that's something that we can counter against those types of teams who do well against us. So I'd say teams who have a lot of physical intensity in the middle of the park, who set up in this mid-block, that engage well, they block off lanes, and they're quick to collapse on either side when you push it to Saka and Martinelli. So that's the best way I'd say to set up against Arsenal.